Hi, everybody. So you just finished watching the literary device video and reviewing all those different pieces, and now it's time to move on to archetypes. So if you're in English 4, this is just a review of what we went over last year. We're going to keep using archetypes as we go into senior English. If you're in English 3, this is a new concept. So depending on your familiarity with the concept of archetypes, will sort of depend on how much notes you take or how in-depth your notes are for this. So for our genre literature in English 3, in every genre we go through, we're going to do a lot of work with archetypes, how they're used and how they change or stay the same throughout time and how they're used within pop culture. And we'll continue to do that kind of work in English 4 as well too. So we are going over archetypes. So again, since this is a recorded lecture, you're able to, hello, you're also able to say hi to my doggy. Say hi, Trigger. Thank you. You're going to be able to pause and replay sections of this. So keep that in mind as you're taking notes. If I'm going a little too fast, you have that opportunity to take sort of slower notes if you need to pause if you go on. But always feel free to email me with any questions, or you can also schedule a Zoom conference. If any of this, it's not clicking at first, we can always talk live as we go through it as well. And Trigger is just very excited to discuss archetypes, so he might stay here the whole time. We'll see. So before we go into the two different kinds of archetypes, there are plot and character archetypes. We have to understand what the word archetype means in general. So an archetype is a reference to a concept, a person or an object or a plot device that's used as a prototype. So it's used over and over again in those genres. Think of it like a cardboard cutout figure that you can just place in a story and use over and over again in the different stories as we go through. The easiest way to identify what an archetype is think about Disney movies. In all Disney movies, especially the earlier ones, you have the princess who needs to be saved from her life, and Prince Charming comes to save the day. Okay. It is used in almost all of those Disney princess films, especially the early one where the Prince Charming comes to save her day and they get married. Okay. That's an archetype. So an archetype is that repeated concept, a repeated kind of character that is used within a genre that helps define that genre. Disney princess movies are defined by the princess needing to be saved and get out of her either humdrum life or her torturous life and the trials and tribulations she's going through. So those archetypes define the genre itself. In horror films, you always have this buildup of suspense in some way. And so how they build up that suspense is part of the horror genre. When we talk about horror films specifically, music and how music is used is an archetype, and how they build up suspense with that music there. So archetypes, they're different for each genre, but they're those pieces, those plot points, those characters that you see being used over and over again to help define the genre. Those archetypes are also how we as audiences connect to those different genres. You'll see that a lot of people really like horror or really hate horror films and horror books. And it's probably because they either do not connect with those archetypes or they really connect with those archetypes and they like watching them over and over again. So it's the archetypes that help also us define what we like to read and what we like to watch and as we go through. So there are two kinds of archetypes. There's plot archetypes and there's character archetypes. We're going to go over both. So the first one is plot archetypes. So these are those repeated references seen over and over again within the plot structures that we see in each genre. Okay. So, for example, the quest. In all adventure stories, even a lot of your superhero stories, you see the quest that your protagonist has to go through. They have to complete this quest. They have to find an object. They have to find a person and complete this quest in the end to save the day. But on the journey of that quest, they also discover more about themselves than they ever knew they could. So we see that over and over again in adventure stories, the journey for the quest. So in Wizard of Oz, while it is a kid's movie, it's technically an adventure story too. Dorothy's going on this quest, and the quest is to meet the Wizard of Oz so she can go home. But actually, she also discovers more about herself and how she feels about her family on the way there. So the quest is that archetype that we connect to. It's that plot structure that they go through. In horror films, settings are those archetypes that are used a lot too. So in every genre, you have sort of those typical accepted settings or repeated settings we see over and over again. But in horror films, they're a lot more identifiable because we see them used a lot in there. So a lot of those archetype settings are foggy nights, unknown territories like deep dark caves that we can't get out of, islands that we don't know where we are, we're lost, the map got tore up, darkness in general. And so those kind of settings play into our fears because we can connect to those fears, we can connect to those settings. So those archetypes always work really, really well in horror films. You're not going to find in most, you might find it, but in most horror films, you're not going to find that the primary setting is Walmart because we're all familiar with Walmart. We're not afraid most of the time of going to Walmart because we're not going to feel lost. Okay. So that archetype setting wouldn't work. But maybe if we changed the typical character, and so if our main character is a kid who could get lost in Walmart, then that setting would work. But you still have this idea of being lost. So we have that archetype motif of being lost in horror films that help us connect with it. So plot archetypes are dealing with setting, how the plot is set up. In films, it's a lot of to do with the music and even the tone of the piece, how mood is created, even the visual effects. So the color schemes that they're using, those can go into your plot archetypes too. So it's almost everything to do with the films except characters, because character archetypes are separate. So just remember, plot archetypes, it's those repeated references we see over and over again in the genres that help define them and help us connect to them. Character archetypes are those character types that we see over and over again in those different genres as well, so we as audiences can connect to them and define those genres. Okay, so in rom-coms, especially in the 80s, if you were into watching The Breakfast Club or 16 Candles or is it What She Want? I can't remember the names right now, but all those rom-coms from the 80s and 90s, you have the pretty girl who doesn't know she's pretty, but she takes her hair out of a ponytail, she whips her glasses off, and she's gorgeous. Oh my God, and she can get the man of her dreams now. Okay. So that's an archetype. That's a character archetype. The girl who doesn't realize she's pretty and thinks she's nerdy and not good enough, and then she gets the makeover, and it's beautiful. Okay. So that's a character archetype in rom-coms that we see over and over again. In horror films, you have that ignorant or brave person, they think they're brave, but they're being really stupid, who goes into the basement even though they hear the terrifying sounds. The person that you're screaming at the screen to not go down there, you idiot, and they still go down there. Or they still go in the woods, they still go check out the sound. That's a horror character archetype that we see over and over again. And in the picture, I'm showing you a dragon because in all of our fantasy genres, there's always some type of monster or beast that has to be defeated or that we think is evil in some way. The beast that shows up and ends up becoming a conflict with our protagonist. Now, with all these character and plot archetypes, though, that doesn't mean they have to be there. A lot of the time, authors and directors choose to break those archetypes and grab our attention with them. So in horror films, where you might see somebody who does hear the noise in the basement and goes, I'm not stupid, I'm not going there. They've broken that archetype. And it grabs our attention because we go, hold up, wait a minute. I usually expect you to go into the basement and then die. So why aren't you? So a lot of the time we have to also pay attention to not only when these archetypes are being used, but when are these archetypes being broken? And so then why is the author or the director breaking these archetypes? And why is the author keeping these archetypes? And it helps us get a better understanding of not only the plot and the characters, but also the themes and the tone that's being set, and then how we as audiences are connecting to those genres and to those pieces. Okay, so you have plot and character archetypes. So now it's time for you to practice. You've watched the literary device video. Now you've watched this archetype video, hopefully taken notes. And now that practice assignment is in Schoology. So in that practice assignment, you're going to go through and identify literary device examples, and you're going to identify plot and character examples in your choice of film, movie, or book. Okay, and all the instructions are there on Schoology. So if you have any questions, let me know. And this pinwheel I put here, so you might want to pause and keep this up on your screen while you're looking at whatever example you're choosing to create your examples of plot and character archetypes, because this pinwheel shows a lot of your typical character archetypes, how they're used and what they're used in. So this might help you define them, and maybe I'll move my screen a little bit there. Now you can see the magician archetype. So this might help you create and find those different archetypes and whatever you're choosing to use as an example. So if I was doing this assignment, I would probably choose Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter to find all my examples in, because it's a film that I'm really, really familiar with. I also have the DVDs, so if I need to pop it in and rewatch a scene to make sure I remember it, I can do that. So try to choose a film or a TV show or a book that you're really, really familiar with, and you're not going to have to think really hard to find those examples because you're just so familiar with it. Okay. So email me with any questions, and have a fantastic day, everybody.